What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2008 Mercedes-Benz W211 E63 AMG. Today on the W211 behind me, we're going to be covering how to do a front-end refresh. In front of me, we have a couple Lemforder components. All of these are available on fcpo.com. One of them is a kit, which includes the upper control arms as well as the two lowers. And then in additional that we threw in here are ball joints and sway bar end links, all from Lemforder, all OE parts. In addition to that, we have all the hardware that we're going to need, including the eccentric bolts that we're going to be replacing today. All of these are going to last you about 60 to 100,000 miles, depending on the driving conditions that your car goes through. Obviously, if you drive in the city, maybe it'll be on the 60,000 mile end. If you do highway driving all day and you have beautiful roads, they'll probably last you around 100,000 miles. Some things to look out for are bushings. As they age, they will tear, they will crack, they get worn. In some situations, they get a little bit squeaky. As they get progressively worse, your alignments will be off, your tires will wear unevenly, and sometimes when you brake hard, you'll have some shaking in the steering wheel. Obviously not counting rotors here, just means that some of these components are getting tired and worn. Now, before we go ahead and get started on this DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. For this DIY, we're going to be using a hammer. We have a 1/2" drive and 3/8 drive torque wrench, as well as a 1/2" drive and 3/8 drive ratchet. We have a flathead screwdriver, some pliers. We have a 13mm wrench that we're going to be using in hand with our bomb tool for our airline fitting. A couple adapters. Behind those, you'll see a bunch of sockets, starting with an 8mm hex, a 12mm hex, a 17mm socket. We have a 13, a 10, and an 8, as well as a 16. We have a 22 for one of our specialty tools. We have a 21 for the 1/2" drive and a 21 for the 3/8 drive. We have an E20. We have a 21mm wrench. We have our ball joint separator tool. This is CTA 4013, which is going to be used with a 24mm socket. We have a paint pen for marking down everything once we torque it, an electric ratchet, an electric impact gun. We have some ball joint tools that we're going to be using to install and remove the ball joints. And we have a screw jack. If you're working at home, you can use a floor jack to mimic what that does. Now we know what tools we're working with. Let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, today we are working on the front right, as I mentioned. We're going to go ahead and start by removing our wheel. We have 5 17mm lug bolts we're going to want to remove. So using our impact and our 17mm socket, we'll zap those off. All right, now next on our list is going to be working on removing the front half of the fender liner. You have 2 8mm bolts, 5 10mm plastic nuts. And if you have all the hardware on your vehicle, you should also have a plastic rivet to remove. We're missing a couple pieces, so we'll take off what we have, and then we'll start with the 2 8mm bolts down below. So we'll start with the 2/8 down at the bottom, just using an 8mm socket on my electric ratchet. Now we can switch over to our 10mm socket. You have one up here, which is missing on our vehicle. You have 2 by the strut. Our top one is missing. We still have our lower one right here. Then we have 2 more 10s up top. And now we can go ahead and work the fender liner off of our wheel well. With the fender liner removed, now we can see the wiring that we need to disconnect that leads to our strut. So let's go ahead and do that next. So if you follow the line that comes off the bottom of the strut, it feeds behind the sway bar. You can just unclip it from this plastic bracket. Pull this other one towards you. Sorry, this one's a little bit hidden behind the sway bar. Free it up from here. And then traditionally there's going to be a bracket here with some sort of expanding rivet that holds this in place. Ours is already broken, so we're just going to pull it forward. But once you pop that rivet off, you can access this connector, which usually is clipped to the back of the bracket. To disconnect it, simply push on the tab and pull away. And now that'll come out with our strut when we remove it. Next on our list, we're going to work on freeing up the strut from the spring arm. We're not going to remove the bolt, but we are going to remove the nut. So using a 21mm socket on the impact gun and a 21mm wrench to counter hold should do the trick. Now with that off, we can go ahead and lower down the car a bit more and work on removing that upper ball joint so we have some more room to remove our strut. 16mm nut, you can use a wrench or a socket. We have a socket on our ratchet right now. We'll try and break that free. With our 16mm nut removed, now we're going to go ahead and grab our ball joint popper tool and pop that ball joint off of our control arm. Got the 24 on the ratchet. We'll give this a shot. Now with that removed, we're gonna go ahead and get underneath the hood of the car and work on disconnecting the last bit of the components that hold our strut into the wheel well. So let's go ahead and do that. Alrighty, back up top of things, we are going to start by disconnecting our electrical connector to the strut. To do that, you just simply press on the tab and pull back, similar to the one we did underneath the wheel liner. Set that to the side. Now we're going to work on undoing our airline. We're going to be using the airline tool that we showed you at the beginning of the video, the bomb tool. However, a 10mm wrench should do the trick as well if you can squeeze one in there. I would recommend a flared wrench if you can. So we're going to slip our tool over. It's got the opening for the airline. And then I'm just using a tiny wrench, but this is a 13mm. The tool has 2 notches for this to go onto, 2 flat spots. And then just break it free. You can do the rest of it by hand. These are only torqued down to 2 Newton meters or so, so it shouldn't be very tight. You'll hear the air escape. We can leave that tool on there for now, no problem. I'll actually keep the line weighted a bit. Now with that undone, we can go ahead and work on removing this cover, just so we have easy access to all 3 of our 13mm nuts, mainly the one in the back corner. So you can see this one's in a bit of rough shape, but you have 3 locking tabs that hold it into place. This one's pretty broken and off, but the idea being is that you rotate them 90 degrees counterclockwise to unlock them. You can simply lift up and remove. Now we have a better view of that back 13mm nut, so let's grab our 13mm socket on an extension and remove all 3 nuts. I got my 13 on an extension. We're just going to zap all 3 off. This plate, you can remove it if you don't want it to fall into the engine bay. Now with our hardware removed, we can go ahead and get back underneath the car and work on pulling out our strut. Now we're just going to go ahead and finish removing that 21mm bolt. Ours is a little stuck in there. I'm going to zap it out with the gun. Now it's just a matter of wrestling the strut out. Now with the strut removed, we're going to go ahead and lower down the car a bit more, get up in the engine bay, and we're going to work on freeing up our upper control arm, as well as work on disconnecting the ride level sensor. So we're going to lower it down. We have our 16mm wrench ready to go for the interior bolts, but now we need to get access to the nuts. So let's get to it. All right, back up top, our main goal is going to be to get access to the 2 16mm nuts. We have one on the front end, very easy to get to, hiding behind some steel braided lines, so that one will be no problem. For the interior one, we're going to want to remove our cabin air filter. A 10mm plastic nut holds this in place. We're just going to go ahead and grab our 10mm socket and back it out. Now we can go ahead and remove this up and just set it to the side. Now for the interior bolt with that cabin air filter removed, if you lift up on your ECU wiring harness, you'll see the second nut poking down there, which we'll show you once we get in there with a wrench. So let's go ahead and start with the easy one first. I use a 16mm wrench to counter hold my nut up top here. And then I have a 16 on my electric ratchet, which I will use down below. Make sure you pull the washer off with that as well. You're going to want to reuse these. And then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with the interior one. Use our nut for the interior one. Now what I'm going to do is, sorry for the lack of view, but I'm going to reach down there and basically pull the bolt out a bit and then use my hands to grab the washer and slide it up. Now let's get back in the wheel well and we'll work on lowering the arm a bit, disconnecting our level sensor and pulling the arm out. All right, now we're going to go ahead and disconnect our level sensor rod from our arm. It's held in with a 10mm nut up top. Sometimes these can get crusty, so I recommend you counter hold the metal bracket down below. We're going to use some pliers to just kind of hold the whole assembly like this, and then we'll hit it with the ratchet on the other end. Let the arm hang down, and then we can pull our 2 16mm bolts out. Make sure you grab the washers too. There's one. And there's our second one. Now we're going to go ahead and take our new arm, feed it into place. And we'll send our two 16mm bolts through. Don't forget the washer. This one, I'm gonna let it hang out a little bit because I'm gonna need to slide the wrench in with the nut already ready to go. Then I'll push it in the rest of the way. But while we have that here, we can grab our 10mm nut once more and feed our ride level arm back into the new upper. Gently rest that. Don't forget these are plastic. Now I'll just go ahead and counter hold with the pliers and we'll snug it up with the electric ratchet. All right, that'll be good. You want to make sure your bracket is in a good spot. Ours is nice and even, parallel with the inside of the arm. Everything actuates properly, so happy with that. Now we'll go back up top and we'll get our nuts started. And then once we torque everything down, we'll talk about that in a moment. The key thing here is to make sure that your arm is sitting at the most 90-degree angle possible against the strut tower. That way that bushing doesn't get torn. If you torque it with the arm being down like that, you're gonna tear the bushing the second the car is under load. If you torque the bushings with the arm like this, the second you pull it down, you're gonna tear the bushings. So the idea is simulating ride height as best as possible. In this case, a 90-degree angle is gonna be our goal. So let's head back up top. We'll get our nuts started and then we'll torque everything down. All right, now up top, we're gonna go ahead and feed the bolts the rest of the way through while we slip on our washers and our nuts. This one's gonna be a little bit tricky. You're just gonna have to reach down there and feed the bolt through with your other hand. Then for the inboard nut, I'm gonna feed it onto my wrench. And then I'm gonna try to use this to get the washer on all the way. And then I'll use my electric torque wrench to run the bolt while I try to feed the nut on. It's gonna be a little bit of a process here, but I think we can do it. I'm gonna keep that there. And I'm just gonna tension this one up a hair and use it to set my level on the control arm. Again, we want like a 90-degree. With that one gently snugged up, let's head over to the forward one and just snug it up. Now we're gonna go ahead and put our 16mm on our torque wrench and torque these down to 50 Newton meters while you kind of hold up top. There's one, and there's two. Now we're gonna go ahead and reinstall our cabin air filter box. Same way we took it off. You wanna make sure that these latch onto the teeth that comes out of the cowl in the firewall. So we're gonna go ahead and clip those on like this and then clock it down. Beautiful. You can hear it clip down there. Fell into place beautifully. Now we can take our 10mm plastic nut and secure our cover back down. All right, nice and snug is all we need. Now let's go ahead and raise the car back up and then we'll start working our way down. We're gonna hit the sway bar end link next and then move on to the lower control arms. And last but not least, that feisty ball joint, which we all know is gonna be exciting, so let's get to it. Next, we're gonna work on removing our old sway bar end link. I have a 21mm wrench that we're gonna be using for the bottom portion that goes into our spring arm. I'm gonna go ahead and break that free. Okay, that's good there. Now we're gonna use our same 21mm wrench to kind of hold the back side of the nut where it connects to the sway bar itself. And then we're gonna take a 12mm hex and zap out the bolt. I'm gonna use my impact just to speed things up a bit. If I can squeeze it in here. And then you can just pull the link off of your lower arm. Beautiful. If you were just gonna replace this today, you're not doing all the other control arms, the strut still does get in your way. I would recommend you at least disconnect the lower 21mm bolt and nut and kind of move it forward, or and if you can off the arm so you can get better access to that 12mm hex. For now, we're gonna go ahead and grab our new sway bar end link and just loosely attach it to the sway bar itself. Since we're replacing our lower arms, we will not connect it just yet. So hold tight. With our old sway bar link out, we're gonna go ahead and leave it off for now until we get ready to install everything again. So that way the new one isn't just dangling around. Okay. Now with that, we're gonna go ahead and raise the car up a bit more. There's some shielding we have to remove to access the hardware for the lower control arms. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, to access the hardware on the subframe side of things for these front lower control arms, we need to remove our shields. They are held in by 8mm bolts. So I'm gonna go ahead and zap all 8 out. We'll do the front shield first and then the rear half. Usually the two scoops that are in here help hold this up a moment. And we have 4 more 8mm bolts all along the back here. With our shields removed, now we have a better view of the hardware that holds these lower control arms in place. So let's go ahead and get situated, and we'll start on our forward arm here, which I'm going to show you when we pull off. This one is actually one of the Synchro design work arms. However, it is going to go back to a stock Lemforder. The main reason for that is this car just sees daily duty. It doesn't really see track use, so there's no need for a heavy bushing like this. And the other thing is you lose your caster adjustment when you're running this design, so just keep that in mind. If you're going to upgrade to these, you lose your caster adjustment. So let's go ahead and get our tools, and we'll get ready to remove this forward arm. I'm quickly going to go ahead and remove this forward shield. I don't want to damage it, even though I can bend it down to get the E-Torx bolt in here. It's just better if we get it out of the way. So just a couple more 8mm bolts, and then we'll give you a better view of the hardware in there. All right, just 4 more held this on. We're going to set this to the side and continue on. All right, we have our shielding off, and for those of you paying attention, you may notice that I went ahead and suspended the assembly back from the upper control arm. I just put it on and threaded it a couple turns so that we don't hurt anything up there, and it helps support everything here as we swap out these arms. So we're going to start with our most forward arm. We're going to go ahead and break our hardware free on the subframe side of things. We're going to use an E20 on the head of the bolt. Squeeze that in there, and a 21mm to counter hold. I'm going to go ahead and set these to the side. If you saw at the beginning, we have new hardware for the eccentric bolts as well as new eccentric bolts, so we don't need to worry about hanging onto these. Now we're going to go ahead and remove our 21mm nut that holds the end of our ball joint end on the arm here. It's a good thing we're also replacing these. We'll show you up close when I get it off, but this bushing is completely torn. We'll be doing tie rods in another DIY, but that bushing is also torn. So, all right, with that off, we're going to go ahead and grab our ball joint separator tool once again and work on popping that out of the carrier. For this one, I'm going to reset my tool back to the bigger, wider setting that we had it at the beginning of the video. We're going to go ahead and break this free. 24mm socket for that ball joint tool if I didn't mention that already. That'll free up our arm over here. We can go ahead and remove our bolts. As you can see, our cooler is a bit in the way. I'm just gonna try to get this bolt out as best as possible. I just needed enough to be free of the arm. It just needed a hair more room to come out. So do as you wish. Maybe you can move yours a little bit more, or you can unbolt your cooler and get it completely out of the way. However, tapping it out didn't hurt anything over here, didn't hurt any of the lines, just wasn't the best feeling thing. But regardless, we got the old eccentric bolt out, or in this case, it's a standard bolt since these arms do not have adjustability, but our new hardware will. So we'll keep that off. And we can go ahead and pull the arm out of the subframe, and out comes the arm. With our old arm out, we can take a closer look at the boot. We can see how torn it was, so it's a good thing that we're replacing these. But before we mock in our new one, we're going to take advantage of the room that we have here. We're going to go ahead and work on removing this lower rearward arm, and we're going to support the front hub with a screw jack. If you're following along at home in the garage, you can use a floor jack or jack stands, just something to help keep some of the weight off that upper control arm. So let's grab that. We'll get ready to remove this arm and go from there. Before we work on removing our arm, I have my screw jack set up on the front of the hub. We're going to take our 8mm hex and remove this bolt so that we can slide this plastic cover up a bit so we can squeeze a wrench in there. And then we should be able to slide this cover up just a hair so that we can squeeze our ratcheting end of our wrench in there. Just like that. Now we can go ahead and break this 21mm nut free. All right, we're going to leave that there. Now let's go ahead and break the hardware free on the subframe side of things. We have a 21mm head on one end and the 21mm nut on the other. We're going to go ahead and use our ratchet and our wrench. All right, we can take the nut off. We can take our washers off. There should only be one washer on either end. Not quite sure why this car has two, but it should be just one washer on the outboard side of the bolt here and one on the outboard side of the head end. So keep that in mind. That bolt's ready to come out. Now we can go ahead and finish removing the nut on our ball joint end. Nut is off. You already know the drill, my good people. Ball joint separator tool to the rescue here. All right, we're gonna use our 24 on our gun. Again, just be mindful these pop pretty loud. You can also just use a ratchet. That was in there. Now we can go ahead and pull the rest of our bolts out. Again, we are replacing these eccentric bolts. That can come down towards us. And out comes that arm. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and use our ball joint removal tool. We're using this Maddox adapter. This one's the 10-1, or number 9 as it's labeled. Fits over our ball joint and it'll seat itself against the knuckle so that the ball joint can pop into it. Now we have our C-clamp. We're gonna seat over it. And we're just gonna get it nice and taut. All right, I got a 22mm socket for my tool. Let's see if we can snug it up. With the tool snugged up, I'm just gonna use the impact to drive the ball joint out. Beautiful. Here's our old ball joint. Here's our new one for comparison. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a little wire brush or some emery cloth, whatever you have, you can use to clean up the area where this sits in, clean up any corrosion. And then I'm gonna apply a very, very light dab of anti-seize in here just so that the next time someone does this job, they have an easy chance of getting this out. So we'll clean this up really quick and then we'll pick you back up when we go to install. All right, with our area cleaned up, a little bit of liquid moly copper seize, anti-seize in there, we can go ahead and seat our ball joint in its new home. Get it pretty even. We're gonna take our bomb tool, we'll take the cup portion of it and slide that over our ball joint. Nice fit. Or I should say our plate and our tool. We'll slide that over like that. All right, everything is nice and snug up. We're gonna need a 22, I'm just gonna zap it in with the gun, don't tell anybody. 22mm on the socket. Go ahead and send it in. And just like that, my good people, the new one is in. With that, we can go ahead and set these tools to the side and start installing our arm. So we'll work our way backwards. We'll get our rearward arm, get that situated and go from there. All right, now we can take our new rearward arm, go ahead and slip it over the ball joint and feed it into our subframe. And we can take our new eccentric hardware, feed the back end first. Then we'll leave everything nice and loose. We're gonna tighten these at right height later once we have both arms installed and our strut. So no need to worry about that just yet, but we can go ahead and install our nut on the ball joint end. Once we get it started by hand, we'll snug it down with our wrench and then we'll go ahead and torque it down. Again, these are still 21mm for the new hardware. All right, now we're gonna continue on by torquing down this nut. I recommend you remove the covering up out of your way and pull out your speed sensor while you're at it so you can fit a socket on there easily. You can just move this brake line a bit to get this out. With that out of the way, we can use a 21 on our torque wrench. And we're gonna wanna torque this down to 50 Newton meters plus 60 degrees. Not a whole lot. Okay. There is our 50. And then I'm gonna make myself a little mark so I can kind of gauge where my 60 is. Some torque wrenches, especially the electric ones, have angle modes on them, which comes in really handy. There we go. All right, with that one situated, we can go ahead and reinstall our wheel speed sensor once again and the cover, as we're not gonna be touching this nut any further. Now we can just go ahead and hand start our bolt. Once everything's happy and aligned up there, up top there's a metal clip that you just pinch back together if it came open for you. That holds that in place there. And we're simply gonna use our 8mm hex on our 3/8 drive ratchet, and we're just gonna snug this back down. Now we can take our new arm and work on installing that. I recommend you do the ball joint end first, so you can maneuver it whichever way you need to get it in there. Once that's in, you can feed the subframe end in. Now we can feed in our new eccentric hardware. Just gonna fish it in between the cooler lines here. Don't forget to put your washer on. All right, give the bolt a couple taps, She comes through on the other end. You can put your washer on and your new nut. We can leave that loose for now. Now we can go ahead and install the nut on our ball joint end. I'm pulling down on the arm to get the tapered end seated there as best as possible. Once we actually go to tighten the nut, I'm going to try to snug it up with the electric ratchet while I pull down on the ball joint end. Now, similar to our rearward arm, we're going to go ahead and torque this down to 50 Newton meters plus 60 degrees. Again, 21 millimeter socket. There's 50. We'll give ourselves a mark to work off of. And there is 60. Same thing if you want, paint mark it so you can make sure it doesn't come loose on you or move. Beautiful. All right, my good people, now we can go ahead and work on installing our sway bar. We're going to use a screw jack to kind of support the whole assembly up and down so we can get it to the sway bar itself. I still have my upper arm connected here. Again, that's just loose. We're going to have to detach that when we install our strut. But to get started on the sway bar, you can go ahead and get that roughly into place. Then we can raise or lower as we need to get our bolt fed through the sway bar. All right, while we have the screw jack, we're going to mimic roughly ride height just to ensure we don't damage anything or bind it up. It's not very crucial for these sway bar end links, but it doesn't hurt to do it the right way. So we're going to go ahead and torque both ends down to 70 Newton meters. Real quick, we're just going to go ahead and snug the hardware down, and then we can go ahead and torque it. Using a 21 on my electric ratchet. Now we're going to swap over to our 12 millimeter hex and our 21 millimeter wrench and just snug up the upper bolt. Now we're going to want to go ahead and torque both ends down to 130 Newton meters. So let's go ahead and do that. There's the top one. And there is the bottom one. Beautiful, my good people. With that situated, we're going to continue making sure everything's set to ride height. If we need to adjust, we will. All right, we have everything set to ride height. As you can see, we raised the car so we can get underneath it. We're going to go ahead and torque both forward and rearward arms to 80 Newton meters plus 120 degrees. So let's snug them up first with our ratchet and 21 millimeter wrench to counterhold. I'm going to snug up on I'm just going to counterhold on the head bolt end and snug up on the nut end. Do the same thing to the rearward. While I have you back here, we'll go ahead and torque this one first. We have our torque wrench set to 80 Newton meters. There's 80. Now we need to make ourselves a mark so that we can rotate this 120 degrees. So right there, I'm at 90. We'll go a little bit more for the 120. All right, I'm happy with that. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for the forward arm. Our 21 in case we need a counter hold. There's our 80. And we'll set ourselves up with another paint mark. Let me lock that in. All right, beautiful. At this point, our lower arms are torqued on the subframe side of things. They are torqued on the carrier side of things. We have our sway bar end link all installed, ready to go. Next on our list is going to be to reinstall our strut and wrap up this DIY. Alrighty, now we can go ahead and install our air strut. We have our arm hanging down. We can go ahead and feed it in through the top, and then we'll set it over on our spring arm. So, similar to how we pulled it out, we're going to go ahead and feed it back in. Just going to start this nut in by hand for now. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up our screw jack underneath so we can line up our holes with our lower spring arm. We'll get our bolt fed in, and then we'll go ahead and get the top of the strut fed into the strut tower, and then we'll go from there. Just going to leave that finger tight for now. I'm going to go ahead and line up my bolt hole for the lower bolt on the strut. Beautiful. Now with that, I'm going to go ahead and set the car to ride height, and we'll go ahead and tighten down the lower bolt, and we'll also tighten down our ball joint end. So let me set up the screw jack and we'll go from there. All right, we have our upper arm at about 90 degrees. We're going to go ahead and install our nut. Just going to use my 21 millimeter on my electric ratchet to snug it down quickly. Counter hold with a 21 millimeter wrench. And now we're going to go ahead and torque it down to 165 Newton meters. Beautiful. Now we can work on tightening up our ball joint up top. Now I'm just going to snug up the 16 really quickly with the electric ratchet. I'm going to pull down on the arm just to get the tapered end to sit all the way in. And now we can go ahead and torque it down to 20 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. Not a lot. All right. Let's mark our point of reference and then we'll hit it with 90. All right. Now with that situated, let's head up top, finish hooking up everything up there, including our 3 13mm nuts, and then we'll finalize everything with the electrical connectors and our fender liner. So let's get to it. Now up top, we can go ahead and reinstall our 3 13mm nuts. Don't forget to put your washer and plates back on as well. We're going to snug them up with the electric ratchet, and now we're going to torque them down to 30 Newton meters. All right, now that we have our shiny new air strut in, we're going to go ahead and remove, there's usually a little white fitting on these that protect this brass piece. We're going to go ahead and remove the one that's equipped in the strut right now. For this, I'm going to use a 10mm socket to get that off. It's just hand tight. Now with our air strut installed, we can go ahead and reconnect our air line as well as our electrical connector. For the air line, we still have the fitting on with our tool. We're going to go ahead and get it into place. On this, we're just going to tighten with our fingers using the tool. If not, I would suggest using the wrench and doing it very gently. The actual torque value is something like 2 Newton meters for it, so it's not a whole lot. Then we can go ahead and plug in our electrical connector. Now we can go ahead and reinstall our cowl piece. So you may need to lift up some of the weather stripping to seat it back in place properly. All right, that's going to situate us up here. Now let's head underneath and wrap up the last few steps. All right, now we're going to go ahead and reinstall our wheel liner, but before we do that, we want to make sure we reconnect our strut if we haven't done so already. So just like we did earlier, we're going to take our wiring. If you remember, it runs inside of the sway bar. We have a notch in the wiring that keys into this clip that holds it into place. All right, then we're going to run it. There's one more notch here that holds the wiring in place as well. We'll do that one after we plug it in. For now, let's plug it in. Again, usually a rivet there holding in this tab. Okay, that's on there. We can slide that back to where it should be clipped into. If you remember at the beginning of the video, ours was not clipped into its home. There we go. Clip that line in that little locating tab, or the wire, I'm sorry. And then that can go back there. All right, now with that, we can go ahead and reinstall our fender liner. All right, fender liner, it's just a matter of massaging it back into place. You want to make sure this outer edge tucks into the inside of your fender and bumper. You also want to make sure to pull down the inner fender and let the inside spot key itself back on the stud. We can reinstall our 2 8mm at the bottom of the fender liner. Now we're going to swap over to our 10mm socket and we'll install the rest of our 10mm plastic nuts. You have one that's located here and one that's located here. Then you have one that's facing up. That's located right there. We're going to go ahead and reinstall that one. And then in some cases, if you still have it, you have a plastic rivet that secures itself right here beneath these fins on the bumper. Now we can go ahead and throw our wheel back on. Now we're going to go ahead and snug them up with the gun. And now we will lower the vehicle back on the ground and torque these down to spec. Now we're going to go ahead and torque these down to 135 Newton meters or 100 foot-pounds. And there you have it, my good people. Another DIY in the books. Overall, a pretty straightforward job doing the control arms on the W211. That ball joint tool really makes life easier when removing and installing the ball joint. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, or there's something specific you want to see in the W211, leave it in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.